They say the worst part about betrayal isn't the act itself. It's how normal everything feels right before it happens. That was true for me. The day it started, the real start, not the beginning I tried to retroactively draw a line to, was a Thursday like any other. I got home around 6, tired but not worn out, dropped my keys in the bowl by the door, and called her name like I always did. She was at the dining table, her laptop open, wedding magazines and post-its scattered around her like some kind of organized chaos. Her hair was pulled up in that lazy bun she did when she was focused, wearing an old hoodie of mine and drinking herbal tea. If you'd paused the moment right there and asked me how things were, I'd have said they were fine. Maybe a little distant lately, sure, but marriage ebbs and flows. We'd been through colder seasons before. She glanced up and gave me a tired smile. "Hey, long day?" "Long enough," I said, dropping onto the couch. "How's the Murphy wedding coming?" They moved the ceremony to the rooftop garden, the one with the elevator that always sticks. Yikes. She laughed, the sound a little forced but still warm. "Yeah, pray for me." It was quiet for a while after that. I flipped open my tablet, one of those larger models we'd shared for years. I mostly used it for email or reading the news, and sometimes she'd log into her cloud account to pull up designs or invoices when her laptop was too slow. We never worried much about whose account was on it. We trusted each other, or I thought we did. A little after 7:30, I was scrolling through some scheduling emails from work when a notification slid across the top of the screen. Ryan Events, elevator, 9:15 winking face, don't be late. At first, it didn't register. I assumed it was something for me, some reminder I'd set and forgotten about, or a random marketing message. But the name struck me as odd. I didn't know anyone named Ryan in that context. I tapped it without thinking, and that's when I saw it. The thread wasn't mine. The tablet had her iMessage account logged in. The name at the top read Ryan Events, but the messages weren't professional. Not in tone, not in timing, not with that emoji. There were a few earlier messages, short and vague. "Same time as last week? You still owe me that raincheck winking face. Can't stop thinking about Monday." My stomach tightened in that slow, creeping way that anxiety starts. Not like panic, but more like a slow cloud rising through your chest, settling under your ribs. I looked over at her. She was still typing on her laptop, phone face down next to her elbow. Her eyes flicked up at me just as I called her name. "Yeah?" she said, voice casual. I turned the tablet toward her. "Who's Ryan?" She didn't squint, didn't lean in to read the screen. She barely glanced at it. Then, with a sigh that sounded more exhausted than caught, she closed her laptop. "You're not serious. Just asking a question." "Mark." She used my name like a correction. "It's nothing. That doesn't look like nothing." She stood up and walked toward the kitchen, grabbing her mug along the way. "He's a contact at the venue. I've told you about him." She didn't look rattled. That's what threw me the most. She didn't scramble. She didn't even look guilty. She looked annoyed, like I'd just accused her of leaving the light on in the garage. "I mean, do you even hear yourself?" She called back over her shoulder as she poured more tea. "You're jumping to conclusions because of a stupid emoji." I stood too slower. "It's not just the emoji. The way he's messaging you, it doesn't sound professional." She turned back toward me, leaning against the counter now, arms crossed. "Are you really reading into that?" I hesitated. "You'd be reacting differently if it were me getting that message." That got her. Her jaw tightened. "You know what? This is exactly the kind of thing that wears me down. The suspicion. The constant second-guessing. You see one message, and suddenly I'm cheating on you? I never said that. You didn't have to." She walked past me and picked up her phone, flipping it over and checking something before locking it again and setting it back down. "I don't have time for this," she said, voice quieter now, like she was trying to convince herself to stay calm. "I've got a double wedding weekend coming up, and I'm barely holding it together. And instead of support, I get this." I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to fight, but something in me was stuck on that message. That emoji. That phrase, "Don't be late." "I'm not accusing you," I said. I'm just asking you to explain something that doesn't feel right. Well, maybe you should ask yourself why you're always expecting things not to feel right. That one landed. It hurt because it was partially true. I'd been on edge lately even before that night. Work stress. Money talks. We hadn't been as connected as we used to be. But this wasn't about me being insecure. This was about a message I wasn't supposed to see. She sat back down at the table and opened her laptop again, clearly done with the conversation. "If you can't trust me after all this time, Mark," she said, not even looking up, "then I don't know what we're doing anymore." The words echoed, harsher than she probably intended. Or maybe exactly how she meant them. I stood there a moment longer, then slowly sat back on the couch. I didn't speak again. Neither did she. The silence between us wasn't angry. It was worse. It was thick with a kind of quiet that only exists when something important has been cracked, and both people are pretending it's still whole. A few minutes later, she got up again and disappeared into the bedroom. She didn't say goodnight. The door closed with a soft click. I sat on that couch for a long time. Eventually, I opened the message thread again. I read every line, scrolled back as far as it went, looking for context, trying to prove myself wrong. But all I found were short, flirty fragments that could be explained if you wanted them to be. Just ambiguous enough to deny, just casual enough to deflect. Still, my gut told a different story. And for the first time in our 18 years together, I didn't believe her. After that night, something shifted. Not just between us, but inside me. I didn't confront her again right away. I didn't snoop through her phone or launch into accusations. But I did start paying attention. Really paying attention. And once I let myself look at the little things I used to write off, they stopped feeling random. I think that's what broke me the most. Not the moment of discovery, but the slow unraveling that followed. It started with the late nights. For years, she hated overtime. She'd complain if a bride wanted to do a final walkthrough at 6 p.m., let alone anything later. Said it threw off her rhythm, that she needed her evenings to decompress. But lately, she was working late too, sometimes 3 nights a week. Always with some urgent client or unexpected venue visit. Always with a polished explanation, just enough detail to sound plausible. But she didn't seem stressed. That's what got to me. She didn't come home tired or frustrated like she used to. She came back with a glow in her cheeks, like she just walked out of a good movie or a spa appointment. And if I asked how the night went, she'd give me a vague, breezy answer, something about a client being picky or a vendor being behind on deliveries, and then change the subject. At first, I told myself she was just hitting a stride with her business. That maybe all the years of late-stage burnout had finally passed. That she was enjoying the work again. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Then I noticed her phone. She never used to care where it was, left it charging in the kitchen half the time. But now it was always with her. And always face down. The sound was always off too. Not just vibrate, completely silent. No notifications popping up on the screen. I didn't ask about it directly, but one night I picked it up to hand it to her while she was across the room, and she practically teleported across the living room to grab it from me. Laughed it off, but too loud. Too fast. That night stuck with me. Not because I saw anything, but because I didn't need to. Her reaction was enough. And the more I thought about it, the more the other signs started falling into place. She bought a new perfume. A strong one. Different from the subtle vanilla scent she'd worn for years. It was bolder, musky, with this kind of dark floral twist that lingered in the air long after she left a room. I asked her about it casually. "Oh, just something one of the other planners recommended," she said. "It's more professional." I nodded like that made sense. But it didn't. She never changed perfumes. She stuck with the same one for over a decade. Said it was part of her signature. So why the sudden reinvention? Then there were the clothes. A new top here, a sleek dress there. Not stuff she wore to meetings or events. Stuff I never saw her wear at all. They'd show up in laundry, still scented with perfume but never mentioned. I'd ask and she'd shrug. Didn't feel right once I put it on. Or just testing out looks for an upcoming shoot. Again, maybe that was true. But it didn't feel true. And then came the canceled trip. We were supposed to fly to San Diego for a friend's anniversary party. It was a weekend we'd both looked forward to. Nothing fancy, just a chance to relax and catch up with people we hadn't seen in years. 2 days before the flight, she told me she couldn't go. Emergency at work, she said, not quite meeting my eyes. The McAllister wedding just moved up a week. I can't leave in the middle of prep. She offered to book me a solo flight if I still wanted to go. But I stayed home, figuring we'd make up for it later. That weekend, she worked late both nights. She didn't bring home files. Didn't ask me to help with vendor calls like she used to when she was overloaded. She just disappeared around 6:30 and came back close to midnight. I didn't ask questions, but I noticed things, like the fact that she showered the moment she got home, before even saying goodnight. Like the faint trace of lipstick on a wine glass she left by the sink. Like the silk robe I hadn't seen in months folded neatly on the bed Sunday morning. The following week, she was unusually affectionate. Brought home my favorite takeout, wore one of my old t-shirts to bed, curled up next to me during a movie night. And I realized then what was happening. She was managing me, like a client, like a PR situation. She was smoothing over the rough edges, distracting me with charm, offering enough warmth to keep me from asking more questions. And the worst part was it was working. Or it would have if I hadn't already started pulling at the threads. Because by then, the memories had started forming a pattern. And once I saw the shape of it, I couldn't unsee it. I remembered the night I walked into the kitchen to grab water and saw her texting under the table, face lit up by her screen, biting back a smile. When she saw me, she locked the phone so fast you'd think I caught her with a stolen credit card. I remembered the dinner when I reached for her hand and she pulled away like I was interrupting her. That weird pause, that glance, like she'd forgotten where she was. I remembered waking up at 2 a.m. and realizing she wasn't in bed. Found her on the couch, wide awake, staring at her phone in the dark. She claimed she couldn't sleep. I didn't ask what she was reading. Even the way she touched me had changed. Or rather, didn't. We used to be casual, affectionate. A hand on my back while I cooked. Her legs brushing mine under the table. Little signs that said, I see you. But lately there was space between us. On the couch, in bed, everywhere. Actual space. Like there was an invisible wall she couldn't bring herself to cross. I'd wake up and find her facing away. One pillow tucked between us like a quiet border. At first, I blamed stress. Work. Fatigue. But then I remembered how quickly she used to reach for me, even when she was tired. How easily we used to fold into each other at the end of the day like muscle memory. Now, I couldn't remember the last time she touched me without it feeling choreographed. One morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror while she did her makeup. We were side by side, like we'd been 1,000 times before. She was wearing that new perfume again, applying eyeliner with a calm, practiced hand. I looked over at her, really looked, and I realized I didn't recognize her expression anymore. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cold. She was just distant, like someone living a few inches out of sync with reality. With me, I asked, lightly, new client today? She blinked once, surprised I spoke. No, just thought I'd dress up. She was wearing heels. Not the comfortable ones. The black stilettos that used to only come out on anniversary dinners or holidays. The ones she used to say were too much for daytime meetings. I nodded, sipped my coffee, and in that moment, it hit me. I wasn't living with my wife anymore. I was living with someone who was already halfway out the door. She told me she was going out with coworkers on a Saturday night. Downtown. A nightclub I knew by name but had never stepped inside. She said it casually, like it was a footnote, already halfway toward the bedroom to change before I could ask anything else. No invitation, no hesitation, no concern about how it sounded. Just a statement of fact. I'll be late, she added. Don't wait up. I nodded. That was all I did. I nodded like this was normal, like we hadn't been drifting apart for months, like she hadn't been guarding her phone like a second skin. Like I didn't already feel the ending hovering just outside the room. She left around 8, dressed differently than she ever did for work events. Dark dress, bare shoulders, the new perfume again. She kissed my cheek on the way out, but it landed wrong. Too light, too fast. A punctuation mark, not a connection. I sat alone in the living room for nearly an hour, telling myself I was overreacting. Telling myself I didn't want to become the kind of man who followed his wife. But the silence pressed in on me, heavy and deliberate. And somewhere between the second drink I poured and the third time I checked the clock, something inside me hardened. I grabbed my keys. I didn't have a plan. I didn't know what I expected to see. I only knew that staying home felt worse than whatever waited outside. The club was loud even from the street. Music thudding through brick and glass. People clustered near the entrance, laughing, smoking, leaning into one another. I parked across the street and sat there longer than I meant to, hands resting on the steering wheel, heart beating slower than it should have. Then I saw her. She was near the entrance, half turned toward a man I'd never seen before. His hand rested on her waist like it belonged there. Not tentative, not awkward, familiar, comfortable, the kind of touch you don't explain. She didn't pull away. They laughed at something I couldn't hear. She leaned in close, her body angled toward him, away from the door, away from the world behind her, away from me. I stayed where I was, invisible, watching. Someone brushed past them, and he adjusted his grip, fingers pressing lightly into the small of her back. She didn't flinch. She didn't even look down. She just stayed there, like that space had always been reserved for him. A few minutes later, another man approached, someone she clearly recognized. He nodded toward the guy holding her, said something I couldn't hear. She rolled her eyes and said something back. I caught a fragment when the music dipped. He's just tired, always tired. She wasn't angry when she said it. She wasn't defensive or bitter. She was dismissive, like she was talking about an inconvenience she'd already moved past. That was the moment I understood. Not when they kissed, though that came soon after. Not rushed, not drunk, just calm and deliberate, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Like it had happened 100 times before. I didn't feel shocked. I felt confirmed. This wasn't the beginning of anything. This was the continuation of something that had already settled into place. She wasn't sneaking. She wasn't hiding. She was done being careful. I stood there long enough to know that if I stayed any longer, I might do something I couldn't undo. So I turned around and walked back to my car. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. Everything went eerily quiet inside me, like a door had finally closed. The drive home felt longer than it should have. Streetlights passed in steady rhythm. Red lights, green lights. The world kept moving, perfectly indifferent. By the time I pulled into the driveway, I knew something with absolute certainty. The marriage hadn't ended outside that club. It had ended long before, and I had just been the last one to notice. I didn't slam the door when I got home. I didn't throw my keys or punch the wall or break a single thing in the house we'd spent 18 years turning into a home. I didn't even raise my voice. Not then, not later. The anger I thought I'd feel never came. Not like I expected. Instead, there was this steady, hollow calm. The kind that sets in when your body knows something your heart hasn't caught up to yet. I sat on the edge of our bed, and stared at the floor for what might have been an hour. Her side of the closet was still open from earlier that evening, half a dress sleeve poking out like a careless afterthought. On the nightstand, her book was face down, spine cracked, held at the chapter she'd probably never finish. I wasn't thinking about the kiss. Not really. I wasn't even thinking about the man she was with. I was thinking about how she looked when she said I was always tired. How casual her voice had been. Like she'd told that story before. Like she'd practiced it. I got up and walked through the house in the dark, turning on no lights, passing every familiar thing like I was seeing it from the outside for the first time. The coffee mugs she insisted on hand-washing. The blanket folded over the back of the couch. The one we picked out on a random Tuesday afternoon 2 winters ago. The hallway picture of us at the lake. The one she once said captured everything that made us feel right. All of it suddenly felt distant. Not fake, not erased, just done. Like a chapter that had already ended, and I'd been standing on the same page, rereading it while she kept flipping forward. I didn't sleep that night. Not a minute. I lay in the guest room, door closed, trying to sort through what I'd seen. But what kept looping in my mind wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization that it hadn't been an impulsive mistake. She didn't just cheat. She transitioned from one life into another. And she did it so slowly, so quietly, that I didn't notice until I was already out of frame. People think infidelity is a lightning strike. Sudden, explosive. But it's not. It's a drift. A dozen small decisions that pile up until you're so far from shore you can't even see where you started. And somewhere along the way, she'd stopped trying to row back. She hadn't been with me for months. Not really. She'd stopped asking about my day. Stopped watching our shows. Skipping through the intro we used to sing. Stopped teasing me when I misquoted movie lines or left the milk out. All those little things that make two people feel like us. She used to reach for my hand in the car without thinking. That stopped. She used to text me dumb memes in the middle of the day just to make me laugh. That stopped too. She used to sit beside me during dinner, not across from me. Somewhere along the line, all of it faded. And I let it. That might be the hardest part to admit. That I saw the cracks and told myself they were just signs of wear. That I was so convinced we were unbreakable. I didn't see the pieces piling up around my feet. The next morning, I heard her come in just before dawn. The front door clicked softly, followed by the faint thud of her heels on the hardwood. I didn't move. She didn't knock on the guest room door. Instead, I heard her in our bedroom, changing, maybe showering. Then the shuffle of blankets, the creak of the mattress. She went to sleep like it was any other Sunday morning. When I walked past a few hours later, the door was cracked open. She was curled toward the wall, breathing steady, one hand tucked under the pillow, peaceful, undisturbed. And I stood there for a full minute, waiting for something inside me to snap, for a wave of fury or grief to crash through and demand release. But it didn't come. Because by then, I wasn't waiting for answers anymore. I wasn't hoping for her to wake up and explain, or beg, or apologize. I had already said goodbye. I just hadn't left the house yet. Later that afternoon, I made coffee like I always did. Measured it out the way she liked, even though she was still asleep. Habit, or denial, or both. The weight of the silence between us settled heavy in the kitchen. There was no confrontation. No confession, just absence. The kind that fills every room even when no one says a word. I sat at the table and tried to replay it all from the beginning. The Ryan message, the cold shoulder that followed, the soft retreat into separate schedules, separate routines, separate lives. All of it felt rehearsed now, like she'd been slowly preparing me for a life without her. Even the affection she did give started to feel like exit maintenance. Little gestures to keep the balance long enough for her to slip away clean. Keep me calm. Keep me confused. Keep me still. I remembered a line she used once during an argument years ago. Something about how women don't usually leave unless they've already left. I didn't understand it then. I do now. You don't just wake up and fall out of love. You wake up and decide to stop fighting to stay in it. That's what she had done. Quietly, methodically, piece by piece. And now, watching her sleep in the room we used to share, I realized I'd been grieving this marriage long before I knew it was dead. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. She eventually emerged in the afternoon, wrapped in a robe, hair damp. She poured herself a glass of water, nodded toward me, said nothing else. No explanation for where she'd been. No lie. No apology. Just silence. I didn't ask. That was the strangest part. I didn't need her to say it. I didn't need the story, the excuses, the false remorse. Because I wasn't waiting for her anymore. That night, I slept in our bed again. But only because I needed to feel how far the distance had grown. The space between us wasn't just physical anymore. It was structural. Coded into the walls. Into the way her back faced mine. Into the way she didn't shift when I lay down. Into the way we didn't speak when we woke up. In the morning, I watched her get dressed for work. We shared a bathroom in silence. She didn't ask about my schedule. I didn't ask about hers. As she left, she paused by the door and turned. "Do you want anything while I'm out?" It was the most she'd said to me in 3 days. "No," I said. She nodded and left. The door clicked shut behind her like it always did. But this time it felt like something final. And I realized the truth I'd been avoiding for too long. The affair wasn't what ended our marriage. It was the evidence that it had already ended. By the time she came home the next evening, my mind was made up. Not in some sudden, cinematic way. Not with fire or fury or grand declarations. It was quieter than that. Like hearing a song you used to love and realizing, halfway through, that it doesn't move you anymore. There was no catalyst. Just the slow, steady confirmation that the person I'd loved wasn't in this house anymore. Maybe she'd been gone for a while. Maybe I'd been trying to hold a shape she'd already stepped out of. That night, when the front door opened, I was sitting on the edge of the bed, folding one of her sweaters. Not angrily, not even carefully, just folding. Something to do with my hands. She looked surprised to see me there. Not guilty, just surprised. "You're home early," she said, setting her bag down. I didn't answer right away. I kept folding. Pair of jeans. One of her scarves. Then I stood and placed them in an open suitcase beside the bed. Her suitcase. The one she used for work trips. Black with one wheel that always stuck when you pulled it too fast. She watched in silence. Finally, she said, "What are you doing?" "I'm not sure yet," I said. "But I think I'm starting." She didn't ask what that meant. She just looked at the suitcase, then at me, and sat down on the edge of the bed like her legs had forgotten how to stand. I didn't yell, didn't accuse. I didn't need to. The truth was already in the room, and we both knew it. She looked down at her hands. "I wasn't going to say anything," she said quietly. "I didn't know how." "You didn't have to," I said. "I saw it." Her shoulders dropped like someone letting go of a weight they were never supposed to carry in the first place. "When?" "A few nights ago, outside the club." She closed her eyes, just for a second, then opened them again and nodded, slow and almost relieved, like the worst part wasn't being caught. It was waiting for it to happen. "I didn't mean for it to be like this," she said. "I believe that," I replied, and I did. I believed that the version of her I once knew didn't plan for this. But that version was gone. She reached for the edge of the suitcase. Not to stop me, just to feel it. Something solid in a moment that suddenly felt very hollow. "Are you kicking me out?" "No," I said. "You're not being punished." "Then why now?" I took a breath. "Because last night, when I lay in bed beside you, I realized I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't hoping, or doubting, or wondering. I was done. And it didn't scare me." She looked at me then, and something shifted in her face. A crack in the mask she'd been wearing for months. I saw something there, regret, maybe. Not for the affair, but for the version of me she'd used to love. The version that would have begged her to stay. That would have fought harder. Broken more loudly. But that man was gone. She chipped away at him until he stopped asking questions. Stopped reaching across the bed. Stopped waiting at the door. Now he was standing across from her, calmly packing a suitcase. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She just nodded and asked, "Do you want me to leave tonight?" "That's up to you," I said. "But this space is changing. I'm not living like this anymore." She stood up slowly and walked out of the room. No slammed doors. No final words. Just the soft pad of her footsteps on the hallway floor. I stayed in the bedroom, finished folding her clothes, and zipped the suitcase shut. That night, we didn't sleep in the same room. We didn't even speak again. And yet, it was the cleanest moment we'd had in months. There's this myth that breakups have to be loud. That they need shouting and tears and broken plates to feel real. But sometimes the quiet ones are more final. More truthful. Because when someone stops fighting, when they stop trying to explain or defend or fix, it's because they've already accepted the end. And that's where I was. The next morning, I woke up to find her sitting on the edge of the couch, dressed but not quite ready to leave. Her bag sat at her feet. The suitcase I'd packed the night before was beside the door. "I don't have anywhere to go yet," she said, not asking permission, just stating a fact. "I'm not asking you to disappear," I said, "but I need space." She nodded. "I'll stay at my sister's for a few days." "Okay." She stood and looked around the room like she was taking inventory, not of the furniture, but of the life we'd built. The photo on the wall. The candle she always said smelled like summer. The pillow with the coffee stain from when we'd spilled breakfast in bed. All of it still here. None of it still hers. "I'm sorry," she said. And this time, it wasn't defensive or rehearsed. It was small, honest, like she knew it changed nothing but said it anyway. I didn't respond. Not because I was punishing her, but because it wasn't for me to validate. Not anymore. She picked up the suitcase, paused at the door. "Will you be okay?" It was a question I would have led to hear a month ago, back when I still thought we were in something worth saving. But now it felt strange, out of place. "I will," I said. "Eventually." And then she left. No tears, no drama, just a door clicking shut. The silence that followed was different than the one we'd been living in. It didn't ache. It didn't linger like a wound. Felt like air, like space I could finally breathe in. I stood in the middle of the living room for a long time, not doing anything, just existing, letting the emptiness take shape, letting the noise of the past few months settle into stillness. Then I started moving, not with anger, not with urgency, but with purpose. I cleared the dining table, threw out the dead plant we'd both ignored, removed her mug from the coffee shelf, moved my books back into the bedroom, rearranged the couch cushions the way I liked them. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't erasure. It was reclaiming. Piece by piece, I took back the parts of the house, and of myself, that had been waiting for someone else to hold them. By the end of the day, it didn't feel like our home anymore. Felt like mine. For a few days, she was gone. Then one evening, she returned. Not with excuses, just with a request. "Can I stay here? Just for a while?" I agreed because it didn't matter anymore. We shared space, not a life. She made coffee in the morning. I worked in silence. We moved like shadows in a house full of echoes. There were no fights, no closeness. Just routine. It almost felt worse than before. At least when there was anger, there was something alive between us. Now it was like two people occupying a memory. And that strange, soft quiet, it didn't bring peace. It brought erosion. On the 10th night, I realized she wouldn't leave unless I truly let her go, and I wouldn't heal with her still here. So I told her, gently, "It's time." She didn't cry, didn't plead. Maybe she already knew. She packed without a word. No argument, no resistance. When the door shut behind her, I stood there for a long time, not looking back, not waiting. 18 years didn't end in a nightclub or a message thread. They ended the moment I stopped needing answers and finally walked forward.